Hi everyone. Wait for a minute. Start. So I think we can start now. Good afternoon everyone. I am Kanksha Shukla from Cancer Solutions, your host for today's webinar. A warm welcome to all of you, and I hope I am audible to everyone. I sincerely thank each one of you for joining us today at this webinar organized by Cancer Solutions. Topic for today's virtual live session is creating responsive plans using S&OP analytics. Now, before I introduce you to our speaker, I want to say a few lines about our organization. So, Kiansa is an IT consulting firm focused on delivering enterprise performance management solutions using market-leading integrated planning platforms. Kiansa was actually founded in 2015 to assist organizations to successfully charge their EPM journeys using new age technology platforms. We have our offices now in Singapore, India, Netherlands, and Canada. We are a global partner of Chetox, which is one of the leading lithium technology providers. Our core experiences lies in creating and delivering EPM solutions in sales and operations planning, supply chain planning, financial planning, and analysis. We have architectured solutions for various complex business cases in food and beverages, healthcare, cosmetics, insurance, consumer electronics, manufacturing, mining, logistics, and shipping industry. And now I would like to introduce our speaker for today, who is Sarjeet Sen. Sarjeet has been a part of Kiansa S&OP Center of Excellence. He has an experience of 15 plus years in delivering enterprise planning solutions, having played diverse roles in technology development, solutions consulting, technology implementation, and cloud enablement. He brings in a holistic view to address challenges that customers bring to us. Sarjeet has also had an opportunity to interact with diverse set of customers, understanding their business requirements, and crafting solutions for working together with them. Much of the content that he'll share today has been a result of those fruitful interactions. And now, before starting the webinar, I just want to brief you on some points. Like to make this webinar more engaging, we are keeping it in listen only mode, which means your audio will be muted. If you have any questions, you can please write all your questions in the question section. The handouts are available in the handout section that you can download. And the recording of this session will be sent to you within a day or two. Now that's all from my side. I request Sarjeet to take us through the session now, and over to you, Sarjeet.
Thank you, Akanksha, for setting the context. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So, warm welcome to everybody. Very happy that we have this opportunity to meet today and discuss this topic. As you can see, there are three key words over here, right? The first one is responsive. The second one is S&OP, and then we have analytics. So much of it, what we're going to discuss is around connecting these dots. How do we have responsiveness in a context of S&OP, and how analytics can help it? And like Akanksha has mentioned a little while ago while making my introduction, um, a lot of the knowledge that you will see here is not my knowledge. It is something that we have been able to glean while we were in discussions and trying to solve problems for our customers. So it's thanks to them that we have this information, we have this insight, that we can share with you. So without further ado, I would move on to the next slide, just to set the context of responsiveness so that we are all aligned on what it means. So the meaning of responsiveness, as we know, is the quality of reacting quickly and positively or favorably to a change. Now, in today's context, it's the capability to react or respond quickly and positively to changes in demand and supply, right? So that is the framework within which we are operating and discussing today. So why is responsiveness a challenge, right? So why is our capabilities, people who are operating a supply chain or who are a part of a supply chain or who manage supply chains, right? So why is it so difficult to be responsive? Why is it so difficult to respond to change quickly and efficiently and favorably, right? So that there are a few observations that we have had. Observation one is that we end up having very high service level agreements. Now, what are contributing to those? First is that the customers, they always want faster and cheaper, right? There's no customer that wants more expensive and slow. And then there are competitive pressures, which means there are competitors who are willing to service them faster and cheaper. And that makes it a buyer's market. And when you have a buyer's market, you generally have very high service level agreements in terms of delivery. The second observation that we have over here is that we end up having too many products. Now, what is contributing to having too many products are you have changing consumer behavior. So consumers are looking for diversity or change, right? And that creates a lot of need to innovate products. So you're bringing in new product lines to keep up with changing consumer behavior, to keep up with competition. And then you're also building more customizations to fulfill exact requirements of your customers. So some of these are really going and contributing to the expansion in the product portfolio that you are carrying. There are too many products, too many SKUs. So that is another thing. The third piece is this, that you have unpredictable demand and supply. So predicting what the demand is going to be and predicting whether you will have a reliable supply of things or not is not easy. Now, if you take all these three things, and people who have joined from real operational experience of working in a supply chain or managing supply chains or planning in supply chains, all these three taken together, having a very high level of service agreement, having too many SKUs to manage, and then having unpredictability in demand and supply contributes to a big decision challenge. It is very, very difficult to manage them together. The decision complexity is huge. So that is why responsiveness is a challenge, right? It's very difficult to respond meaningfully, profitably, and adequately. So what is inside your organization? Now, if you get into inside an organization, there are two parties that we see often. The first one is sales, who are trying to drive revenue and very concerned with customer satisfaction. And then the other side is the supply chain, which is trying to make things available. So sales expectation is simple, that you don't want to miss out on any sales. And if you have agreed, then you want to not miss the customer SLA. The supply chain responds to it, to this, a big task of not refusing. It's almost like a no refusal policy. They are actually trying to move from a make to order strategy to a make to stock strategy, even for customized products. So that is something that we are seeing. Everybody tries to see what can we really make MTS from MTO, which were traditionally MTO. How do you move them to MTS? How would we still determine the level of stock? The second thing, which is very common, is you start holding higher levels of inventories in different locations. Very popular, phenomena of bullwhips and obsolescence and a lot of other problems, right? So the response is still there, that you still want to hold higher levels of inventories. And then the other thing is you change your supply plan frequently because your demand plan is also changing frequently. So how do we kind of keep it more fluid is the response. But is this response sufficient? right? So our observation is that the response is not sufficient. That means however much the supply chain tries to keep up with sales, they are finding it very difficult, because first of all, it's not easy to forecast demand and make everything to an optimal level of stock. We'll cover that topic in the forecastability section when we talk about it later. It is always expensive to hold higher levels of inventory. So finance is always going to question you for the inventories that are holding, that you have to liquidate, because you're not, if there is perishability, it makes it even worse. So that is the challenge. And then you have, making your supply plan changing every time has its own effect, right? Both soft and hard. So the performance gap keeps increasing, or there is always a challenge here. And the impact overall, because the supply chain represents the cost side of your business, you end up actually holding too much inventory, and you are accruing different types of costs, and you have the risk of obsolescence. And then you have issues with your production plan changes around changeovers, around impact of changes of other resources. And of course, you have issues with the softer aspects of your staff, because they are always facing burnout. So eventually, this imbalance leads to higher costs, right? In terms of hard costs as well as soft ones. So this was about the responsiveness, the challenge around responsiveness, the impact of not having, not being able to keep up with the responsiveness requirement. So now we move to the other topic, or the other dot in the overall canvas, which is the sales and operations planning. Now, many of you who are on this webinar, or who will be watching this webinar later on, they definitely could be people who understand this process very well. They could be practitioners. But for the benefit of the people who might not be so familiar, I would just want to spend a minute on explaining what this process means in the simplest of ways. So basically, we talked about the sales and the supply chain, right? So there are people who are trying to drive up the demand, the sales. That's the the sales team, and you have another set of people who are trying to align and trying to meet that demand by purchasing, by building, right, by moving. So there are different people who are taking care of meeting that demand, right? So there's sales and there is operations. Now, what does sales and operations planning do? So what it does in a nutshell is you bring in people from both demand and supply sides to meet and agree on a plan. And many times they cannot agree on the plan because there are certain constraints on both sides. Now, what S&OP does, it helps people to make the decisions based on balancing the cost and service levels, right, roughly. And it involves analyzing a lot of demand and supply data, because if you have to make the right decision, you have to go and see. You have to look at data and see what it is telling you, and based on that, you will make a decision. Now, traditionally, S&OP meetings are run as in a monthly process. And increasingly that we are noticing is that it's, people want that plan to be more responsive. That means it's not like you can lock down the plan once for all and then say that, we will sail through this month without changing it. I think most people that we speak to, they cannot actually hold their S&OP plan, whatever has been agreed for the rest of the month. They make changes at a weekly level also. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it necessary? I'm not a person to judge it, but that is what we are seeing. Now, our topic of interest today is the challenge that should we traditionally run, a monthly process, and how do we make the S&OP plans a little bit more responsive, right? So that's where S&OP and the responsiveness challenge comes together. Now let's bring in the analytics part. So first of all, is it possible to build a responsive S&OP? That is the crux, because if you're able to build a plan where the demands and supplies are coming together, there is information around that. Can we build out a plan which is responsive, which means which can respond to change effectively? So our understanding is that it's possible, and the reason why it is possible is that people who run S&OP processes, they already have aligned the different functions, right? So you have people who are coming in from sales, who are coming in from the different functions involved in the the operations side. So they are already there. So alignment of people, right, and information around demand and supply, they are already there. And you're looking into it, maybe monthly, maybe weekly, maybe daily, but you have at least done the groundwork. Now, if you are adding analytics to this mix, then what you can do is you can use analytics to present alternative scenarios for making decision quickly, right? So analytics can help you make decision quickly, and it can actually create an S&OP decision framework, which will help you to not have the same conversations again and again. Because one of the things that we see is people having the same conversations again and again, the same problem again and again. It doesn't just seem to go away, however much you wish. And that's where a lot of time is spent. That's the place where a lot of frictions are, right? And that's where a lot of burnout are. So creating a decision framework is very important, and that is what analytics can help you with. And I'll be able to show you a couple of examples of how analytics help you there. So basically, making quick decisions with the right awareness helps you to build plans that have that resilience, that have that capability to change, because everybody understands the change. They have a way to discuss the change. They have a way to analyze information and come to a conclusion which everybody can agree on more quickly. So the news is good that it's possible and it can be demonstrated. So from a demonstration perspective, there are 4 models that we will show you today. There can be many models, right? It's a highly dynamic field. There can be multiple models that are coming in. And when I say model, it doesn't mean anything mathematical. These are principles. So today we will discuss 4 analytical models. And the good thing is this, that these don't really need you to manufacture any kind of different data set. So the data set that you already have for your sales and operations planning, you can use them to create these models. And then, like I said, we can create these tool sets for decision making, and they have the flavors of descriptive, predictive, prescriptive models, uh, you know, and scenario support to help you with. So the models that we will go and dig a bit deeper are the forecast analytics, product classifications. They are primarily on the demand side, and then priority-based product scenarios and slotting-based product production scenarios on the supply side. Okay, so let's now be ready and go a little deeper into understanding each of these. So just get my throat wet a bit. Okay, so let's cover forecast analytics first. So what is the eventual goal of getting your forecast, right? If your forecast is correct, that means you are able to generate accurate picture of the future, then you can better align your resources to meet them. It is as simple as that. Now, that means that your goal is to improve your capability to predict your future demand. And in organizations, you're using science, which is basically data science and all the associated uh, jargons around it, the practices and principles around it. And you also use human intelligence because you don't want to factor that out. You still are important in decision making. And then you also want to identify products which have predictable demands and which you don't have predictable demands. So you want to also look at which ones are having good forecasts and which ones don't have, because you want a different treatment for each. So when you perform forecast analytics, sometimes people we have seen are making very fundamental errors. For example, the pitfalls they fall into often are uh, they have an incorrect demand signal. So when we say demand signal, it could be a sales order, it could be your shipments, right? It can be a point of sale data, it can be anything, right? There can be multiple demand signals that you can have. So many times the fundamental error is to choose a demand signal that does not indicate real consumption. For example, you might be picking up sales orders as your demand signal and trying to forecast a monthly or a weekly demand forecast based on your sales orders, your historical sales orders. Problem can be this, that your sales orders especially if you're in B2B, it may not be just because of consumer demand. The sales orders could be there to lock down prices. The sales orders could be there's an urgent requirement on your customer side, right? So they have a sudden spike, and there can be other things, where you have, or it can be your own sales team, winning a quarter end sales deal, which does not, it's more to achieve their targets rather than really, uh, a real necessity of the end consumer. So things like that happen. So if you're picking up the incorrect demand signal, you will have a difficulty in projecting the right uh, forecast scientifically, right? So that is one very big problem that we see. The other thing that we see is we don't include the lost sales. Now, that is a big problem because the lost sales, because of stockouts, are not really captured that well. Now, if you don't capture them, you don't know what you missed out. So they'd never come back to your historical actuals and say that, okay, we lost sales, but they actually would have been real sales. That is the real demand. So including that is a very fundamental thing to do, right? And then the third thing is we often overlook sales team bias, which is driven by their own reward mechanisms or their relationship with the procurement team. So they could have certain biases. So that needs to be also taken into account. And then the fourth pitfall to avoid is that there is an excessive obsession to trying to forecast everything to a very, very precise level, every item at a very precise level, which many times drains energies and which does not really give you much value in the end. So what does forecast analytics do? It's forecast analytics actually looks at uh, the different, finds out what is the demand signal that uh, helps you to correlate best with true consumption. So identifying the demand signal, which is a fundamental thing. Second thing is that if you want to restate your actuals and then feeding that into your historical as a historical data feed into your forecasting system, so now the forecasting system is more aware of the real consumption pattern, or which is more likely to happen. So its forecasting is uh, possibly going to be more enriched and accurate. Now you can also compare multiple forecasts. Now, when I talk about comparing multiple forecasts, I mean by that not just the scientific forecasting generated by the AI, but the forecasts that are also human forecasts, like the sales forecast, the demand planner forecast, consensus forecasts. So there are different types of forecasts that are there that can be compared, because you may want to see how they compare, how those point of views compare against each other. That's a fantastic way to look at bias also. And then if you are looking at different forecasts, you want to classify the items based on which forecasts are most reliable, right? So those that can help you classify forecast. And then as a result of performing the right forecast analytics, you first of all generate the right forecast. You have a better chance of generating the right forecast because your the input data is better, the demand selection is better, the signal selection is better. So definitely there is a better capability of better chances of getting the right forecast. And it also classifies where the statistical forecast is good, where the sales forecast is better, or demand planner forecast is better. So you can look at the forecast performance of different entities that are participating in the process. And then, for certain things, it does not need you to review all the forecasts and saves time, right? And you may want to choose the best and most reliable prediction out of the different forecasts that are available. So I'll give you an example here. So the analytics that you can run is the first, we are seeing these charts over here. The first one over here in the left is talking about what is the change in your consensus forecast after the baseline statistical forecast is run. So if you see that there's a large change in the consensus forecast versus your statistical baseline, you will always ask, why is there so much of variation, right? So that's an issue. If you see that there is not much of a change between consensus forecast and statistical forecast for certain items, then you may say that you don't need to have consensus around it separately, explicitly, because you can trust your statistical forecast baseline, which is pretty good. So you won't be adding much forecast value add, right, to by just taking them into a manual review. So you'll save time. The second chart that you see on the right over here, it actually compares the different forecasts of the different participants, comparing them with the baseline, the what really happened, the consensus, sales manager, demand planner. You see them side by side, and you might be able to see where uh, how they compare against each other. Is there anything dramatic where you see a particular bias, or you see certain trends in or differences in their forecasting? So that also helps you to understand how things are, right? Your forecastability. And then also when you look at your forecast, whichever forecast you eventually pick, it need not be the statistical forecast, but it could be any forecast. It could be consensus. Like in this example, we are looking at the consensus plan because it has the best forecast that we could think of. And still, you're looking at, when you compare with actuals, you see this. So your forecast may not be very reliable despite all your processes. Now, what happens? How do we use this analytics is, now this in the screen, if you see, if you have to pay a little bit attention here because the fonts are a bit smaller than I would have liked. But here using the analysis, we have one, now it's a demand planner screen. They're looking at different forecasts and they're preparing information for the S&OP meeting. And here, if you see, there's a tiny little comment from the system that the planning strategy is sales versus for this particular product over here, the planning strategy is statistical. So what it means is it gives an indication that for this particular demand forecast, you should trust the sales manager forecast because it is perhaps more accurate. And for this particular set of inputs, you rather trust the statistical forecast because that is more accurate. So unless there's a real reason to challenge them, you could trust them and let it pass. So what it actually helps you do is to reduce time in reviewing all the different types of forecasts because system is telling you that which forecast you can trust, which forecast you need to review, and whose forecast is more agreeable so that the consensus can take those as the planning strategy and move on quickly. So that saves time. That helps you to look at the more, the items that really need your attention. So this is pretty much on the first topic. Now we move on to the second topic. So we are shifting from accuracy to risk management, right? That's the major shift in the mindset. Accuracy is trying to predict a particular number, whereas risk management is trying to tell you, what if I don't get it right, right? Because there is a chance that I don't get it right. If I don't get it right, what would I do? So that is where the goal is to manage a large number of items which have unreliable forecasts. Now, what do you do when you have such large number of SKUs which have unreliable forecasts? So the pitfall to avoid is, like, I've seen people sitting across the table having a large list of items in a spreadsheet, all colored red because they have failed the forecast accuracy metric. Now, the problem here, which I often suggest, is that you are treating all your demands as equally important. So it may not be so, right? Improving the accuracies of all types of demands may not actually contribute to value. So the solution that we see is, when you look at your demand data, imagine you're looking at weekly shipments and you compute your demand frequency and variability of those products, and you can do it per location. So you have a particular product, you are actually seeing the movement in multiple locations where the point of consumptions are, and then you're looking at the frequency and the variability in terms of the quantum of the output, right? So what is the difference in the levels at which they move and the frequency in which they occur? So if you have this information, you can classify the products into logical segments. For example, runner, repeater, visitor. So for example, the ones that have the products that are demonstrating a very steady demand, very frequent, that means they are frequently occurring and they are, the variability in the volume is not too high. You can classify them as running products. Similarly, the ones that you can see that there are intermittent frequencies, but they have healthy demand, you could call them as repeater. Then there could be ones that that are highly intermittent, and you may not have. They could demonstrate a lot of variability also. You would classify them as visitor. And then, these are things that are terminologies that you, depending on your business, can also coin. You can create those depending on what makes sense to you. But what happens is you have a clustering algorithm which is looking at your shipment data, like we just talked about, and is able to tell you and break it down into different clusters, which means you are looking at SKUs or planning items at different buckets, which could be very different in terms of their profiles, and which might need a very different type of approach. Uh, and that goes back to the point of not looking at all the demands as equally important. So if you're not looking at all the inventory that you carry as equally important, then you might have a policy for it to handle different segments, right? So you might have a different stocking level for running products versus the visitors, right? That would actually help you to contain the accumulation of inventory uniformly because of just some forecast variability, right? So you are looking at other aspects also. So the result of it is this, that you'll be able to set the right levels of inventory in the right locations, and you can also identify where SLAs can be negotiated with sales and customers, because once you have a segmented view, you might be actually seeing a product which is more infrequent, but you are still carrying a lot of inventory occasionally, just in case you miss out an order. You can actually go to your sales, or you can actually carry forward that conversation with your customer and see that if you are carrying certain products which is unnecessary, or you are just carrying it because uh, it doesn't justify really that, right, from a cost and service level perspective, because you'll have to have those numbers. You have a point of renegotiating your SLAs, right? And then you can also identify opportunities to standardize items. So if you have too much customizations, but those customizations are not selling, so is there an opportunity to go negotiate and uh, you know kind of shrink the category a bit and say, only let's try to shrink it, consolidate it, and standardize it, or even phase out items that you are not selling so much, right? You're just carrying them. So there is an opportunity to reduce your SKU count. So the reduction in your SKU count also reduces the decision complexity, because you're dealing with lesser number of items, right? So how do we do product segmentation in a real case? So I take you back to the same screen again. Here, depending on the frequency and the volumes, the S&OP analytics systems are flagging to the demand planner that this particular product that you see is a visitor product. It's infrequent, right? Versus this particular product is a running product. So if you have to make certain decisions, these are inputs using which you can further qualify the level of stock, qualify abnormal demand predictions, so you will possibly have a better understanding of this as you update the plan, or when you discuss this with your between sales and operations. So these were the two things that we discussed from that are mostly looking at the demand analytics, right? The mostly looking at demand information. But that's not all. I think there are opportunities to look at the supply side also. So whatever happens, one common observation is that the supply plan changes, right? So many people in the audience, you may be nodding your head if you are in the production, uh, you know, a product owner of a production line. You know that sales comes and says that, hey, can we make this change because there's an urgent requirement from a customer, right? So what do we do? So the goal is decide which demand to fulfill, when there is a priority in the, with the change in priority from sales. Um, so what do we really want to avoid when we do it, right? So first is this, that we cannot agree on everything, because there's always a cost associated to change. So not reviewing the impact on the production plan in terms of capacity and materials, that would be a big problem that we all inherently know, right? And then what we often don't do, because the first point over here is something that any person in production or the supply side, they know it. They know it, and that's why they resist it. But what they often don't do is they don't evaluate the other options and inform sales that, hey, we can have a few alternative possibilities. The conversations that happen are, like I said a little while ago, that it's a repeated conversation, which is just about who has the last say. It is not revolving around discussions around what alternatives are available, what is the impact of some problem, how does it affect in terms of the overall costs. So those information are not available. So what do we do? What is the method here? So the method is this, that you assign priorities to products for resource allocation. Now you run a scenario. Now this scenario is not really your master production schedule, but this is only a scenario which you're running to allocate your resources based on the changing priority. Now you might alter the priorities on certain SKUs on a certain line, and you can compare different scenarios on the fulfillment and the production plan, right? So you may want to create these scenarios and say, if the priority shifts and certain product becomes a higher priority, and that gets the all the resources first, then what really happens? Which other demands are not met, and what is the impact of it? So that visibility is given, that those scenarios can be compared, and you can go back and have those discussions, more informed discussions with your sales. Right, so that's what we are saying in the results section, that you can quickly understand the impact of a production plan. When the priorities change, you can compare, you can provide options to sales team to make a choice instead of just a dry argument, and then you select the most favorable scenario during your demand supply review. So I'll show you an example here in the screen in the tool. So we are talking about an exception on a certain week. As we look forward, we are seeing that there might be constrained capacities because of a planned maintenance, and you might have no capacities in certain lines. So that is creating an imbalance of demand and supply. Now, not because there's a constraint, you cannot actually fulfill everything. So what do you do? Right? Or there is a certain, it could be the other, the discussion, the example I gave was more of supply driven discussion, but there could be a sales driven discussion also, that certain products have higher demand and you want to meet it, and certain things can happen from the sales side. So net, it's a change in the plan. Now, what you can do is you can actually go and look at a product, the line that it's assigned to, the resources that it's assigned to. You can realign the priority, and then taking into account all these different capacity, the parameters, you actually see the impact on fulfillment. Like certain things might get fully allocated, some may not get allocated at all, some can get partially allocated. So this view is available from a fulfillment perspective. You can imagine, you can actually have a view on the resource side also. This is around product. You can actually have a view on the resource side also. Based on this particular plan, what is the utilization? Are certain lines overloaded? Are certain lines underloaded? So an exactly converse view is also possible to see, where you can actually see what is this view is for the fulfillment, the other view could be for the load. So taking these two things into account, you could actually compare and see what is a healthy mix. You have information, you can play around this information because these are dynamic screens. You can go change things and see the impact, agree on something, and whatever works best, you can take that information with the right assumptions, with the right awareness. So this is the concept of priority allocation. So the fourth one is called a dynamic slotting production scenario. So what it basically means is, now one of the things that if you are running a production unit, one of the things that uh, you have as a goal is that you want to sweat your assets, right? So you want to have high productivity, you want to run those lines because you don't want to have idle capacity. Now the thing is, what do you do with them, and what is the best usage of those? So many times have idle capacity, and then you might want to use them, identify and use them for pre-building seasonal demand, for you know shape your demand a little bit, where there is a possibility to prioritize certain demands and also deprioritize or delay certain demands depending on um, the sales guidance, right, or the inventory guidance. So those are possibilities, right? Now, many times what we do when we are trying to kind of slot things in production is not to look at the impact on materials and storage. So that is a very basic thing to look at. that it's not just about your production capacity, but if you produce it, would you be able to store it? Would you be able to make it in the first place if you have raw materials for it? So the dynamic slotting is not just about slotting into certain open production capacities, but also to link them with the dependent capacities of storage and raw materials. So I think by now you might have already understood you've gotten the drift. So the solution is this: that you want the system to identify free slots, right, over the weeks, and then you might want the system to suggest, or you might want to use those slots, identify them to pre-produce material that have stable demands. Like we talked about running products, you know that they will get sold, they may not have perishability. You may have a good hunch that uh, if you are building them ahead of time, you'll still be seeing them move. So you go use that, you slot them into the free capacity and then run them, right? And then you can also delay certain demands to level load production if it is possible, right? So you can actually take care of the peaks and the troughs and level load, because the system is actually telling you, giving you a picture of the free slots. So what it helps you achieve is you don't want to get into frequent changeovers to accommodate running stocks, because you know that you can constantly make them based on wherever you have capacities, which takes care of your running stock, make to stock type of configurations, and you're also taking care of your asset sweating, right? So you're taking care of both. Then you're looking at, you can pre-build stock for seasonal materials. You know that certain things will start selling more in summer, and you start building it out a few months in advance, and you make arrangements from a resource and storage perspective also, to take care of available capacities. You can also build, for the more discrete manufacturing, or where you can actually have assemblies, right? You can also make work in progress inventories using free capacities that can be customized later using, a Kanban technique, or there could be parts that actually fit into multiple other components. So they can generic ones. You can keep building them using free capacity and then pull them into the demands when you have that work order. So this all can happen if you are doing a dynamic slotting scenario. Um, the example of this one is here. Like for example, we are looking at a particular product in a particular plant in a particular week. We are looking at what is your capacity, and what is the allocation. And you actually see this. The important thing is that you have a slotting pool, you have a lot size restriction, and it's actually telling you the load on the lines, right? And it's telling you where you might have free capacity. So in this example, you're trying to move your demand or shape your demand a bit if possible to level load, right? So that's the example that you have here. So similarly, the other examples or scenarios that I mentioned is possible because you're able to have a visibility to, how your line looks like, and what's the load on the line, and what's the demand on the product, and can it be moved because of different reasons. Can you pre-build it? Can you delay the build? That sort of a discussion is possible. So that takes me to the summary. So what we started off with were three themes: responsiveness, S&OP, and analytics. So we have looked at responsiveness, the need for it, the challenges in it. We have looked at S&OP as a part of the process, the data that we get in S&OP, the people who are involved in S&OP, and what is their objectives. And then we looked at analytics, the different scenarios, the ways we can use S&OP information, the demand and supply data, to let the analytics work for us and give us information as we plan uh, to mitigate risk, make the right decisions. So the summary is simple: that you have to accept that the plans cannot be very rigid, and the changes will come. You cannot ignore them. Now you have to have plans that have certain built-in tolerance. You have to have plans that support agility, right? And it's more proactive. It's more intelligent in the way of suggesting you changes, being able to helping you to compare changes. And once you have those models, you can use them during S&OP. You can create frameworks where you don't have to revisit the same conversations again and again. Certain decisions can be made based on the policy, where the policies are not clear, you could have simulations and scenarios where you can look at the cost benefits, the impact, and then based on that, you can go and make the decision with more awareness. And overall, you are better placed to respond to change than having a very static plan, which nobody can seem to keep at. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation today. Um, Akanksha, I would like to hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rajit. That was a wonderful session we had. And I hope the audience must have found it very useful, the information that you provided. So I can see we have some questions for you. So let me just read them one by one and if you can answer them.
Okay, I see one over here which says for customized product, it
First,
may possibility of a wrong demand signal.
how can we solve it? Yes.
Yeah, I don't think the wrong demand signal is only a problem for customized product alone, right? The choice of a demand signal is very important. Like I said, like what really gives you the correct picture of consumption, which often is ignored. We don't take that into account very seriously. For a customized product, which is, many times if there is a chance, people would actually want to go for make to order. That's what is the typical uh, strategy for your highly custom products. But then people are not able to keep to that strategy because of because of the SLAs are much higher than what your total lead times are. So for customized product, I don't think it will still be about how much customization you want, and then do you have an understanding of the real consumption? Is there a way you can look at uh, the if there is a particular, say there is a particular item group, and under that you have multiple um, variants. So can you actually forecast, at an aggregate level, which gives you a very reliable forecast, at least then for the raw materials purchasing, which has a higher lead time, right, or capacity forecast at an aggregate level, you should be able to have that manageable. But the final customization, the final configurations, depending on whether you are a discrete manufacturing or you are in a process manufacturing, because they can be vastly different. It would, the final change, how long can you delay the change, would play a very, very big role. So I think that is more about um the configuration, the delaying of it, the aggregate planning versus the finishing of it. That is what is more important for customized product rather than the demand signal alone. Right? Demand signal, I think, is more of a universal phenomena for all type of products.
So we have one more question. Like,
Mhm.
how would you foresee that AI can help in sales and operations planning?
Um, so the item that I was showing you earlier, um, the forecast analysis, right? So that is where you have an opportunity to use AI, because what AI does is, very simple use case for AI is you could do time series forecasting, or you can do causal forecasting. In time series forecasting, you're trying to look at your historical information, trying to detect patterns in it, which is all very well known. So that is where you can actually use regression techniques to see whether you can fit a curve, and you could see if the accuracy it by partitioning your data into, say, a training set and a test set, right? In terms of your AI parlance, you can use that type of techniques to see and play around different algorithms and to try to find out what is the best fit. So that is where, if you want to do simple time series forecasting, mm, you could use AI. You could also, if you want to detect causality, there are techniques to go and try to find out the strength of correlation, trying to figure out what affects or identify the the independent and dependent variables, and what is the strength of association and correlation between them using covariance and other techniques. So that is where the AI can also go help and try to detect the dependencies, interdependencies of what can affect your eventual demand forecast, and help you create models where you can input the knowns, and based on the information of the knowns, you can predict the unknown, which is most often the demand, right? So definitely there's a lot of application of AI in demand forecasting.
So we have one more question. Would there be a summarized formula to forecast the quantity, say including seasonal factors and etc.?
Can you say that again, Akanksha?
Yeah, so it's would there be a summarized formula to forecast the quantity, say like including seasonal factors or anything like etc.?
I don't think I understand the terminology around the summarized factor, but yes, if you have seasonality in data, you have algorithms that can detect seasonality, right? So the part of the AI, continuing the questions that the previous one, you could have algorithms that can detect seasonality in data, and when it forecasts, it is forecasting the future based on the seasonal trends, the seasonal, the shifts in demand, the peaks and troughs. So it definitely is able to detect seasonality. Um, the summary part, I'm sorry, I'm afraid I did not understand, but if you could clarify, maybe later on in an email, I will be able to help respond to that.
We have one more question. Like,
Mhm.
in context of being responsive, what do you see the frequency of the S&OP process?
The frequency of what?
S&OP process.
Okay. So I think, we are trying to link responsiveness with the frequency at which people meet. So we see a big spectrum here, right? So one spectrum here is that the traditional S&OP, which is talking about having a monthly plan, because it takes time to prepare data, to analyze them, get them ready for people to make decision, and then have the people get their time to perform those analysis and get their time for the meeting and make decisions. So that is where the traditionalist will say that 1 month is good enough, right? But then there's the other uh, end of the spectrum, which are talking about continuous planning, which means that you are always aligned and planning is happening. Decision making is a continuous stream. That is another end of the spectrum, and people are often even talking about complete automated decision making, autonomous organizations, which look like dreams to us at this point, but people definitely see potential in those thought processes. That's why they are invested in those thought processes. We cannot rule them out. But the reality is this, that frequency does not always mean quality, because the examples that we have seen is uh, people are having demand and supply meeting every day. I have seen the demand, the salesperson and the person who is in charge of production, right, or overall delivery. They are on phone calls frequently, hour on hour, day on day. That means the demand and supply interaction is happening continuously. But does it really enrich the quality of the output? Does it enrich the quality of decision? I don't think just because people frequently meet, it automatically means that the decision quality is improving. What really is happening is you get into the same situation again and again, and it just becomes arms wrestling, where you're trying to figure out who wins the argument or who gives up first, right? So it doesn't, the frequency automatically does not imply the quality of the decision. So what our recommendation is to enable people, like whether they are meeting at whatever frequencies that suits them, but when they meet, their discussions, their arguments are based on information, based on intelligence, rather than a wish or a constraint alone. So I would say that I cannot uh, prescribe the frequency of SNOP meetings. That is not something that is right thing to do. Depends on the maturity level of the organization, depends on the need of the organization, the type of environment and industry they are in, the type of market they are operating into. So I would not be able to prescribe that. But what I would like to prescribe is that there should be discipline. That means you definitely have to have opportunities where people are meeting. So that discipline should be there, and the information needs to be available in a way where you can go and make the right decision. So that's where the importance of analytics. So the discipline is more of the people and process part. The analytics is the information part. So if all these three things come together, then there is a fair chance of getting it right.
And Sarkit, I think people must have got a clear vision of that. So I can see there are actually few more questions, but as we are heading towards the end of the webinar, I think we'll reply to everyone through mail
Sure,
and whoever we are not able to answer now. So yes, I
sure.
would like to thank you for the wonderful session and everybody who has attended. Like, thank you once again for joining us today, and it really was an interesting session from you, Sarjit. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you all. And then a brief thing around Kiansa again. So we are here to help you. We have expertise in EPM. We have global offices, so we could have an office which is near to your where you're operating. We have qualified people who work with us to both in terms of technology as well as business process. So you can rely on them for good delivery. And then we have partnership with technology companies, like we are going to partner with JDocs, which is a leading EPM solution. So we have good backing on the technology support as well. We have good customer base, and so we have experience in multiple types of industries. So it gives us the enrichment that is necessary to tackle the problem that you might be facing, because we might be familiar with what you're doing, and we be able to help you there. And then the domain expertise and everything else, right? So that's all that we have gotten over time. And then this is something that we are it gives us the confidence, gives us uh, that makes our intent more strong to go and help you with your business process, with your SNOP and any other kind of planning. So if you are willing to do a free SNOP health check, which means some kind of a dipstick study to review your process and understand your pain areas and provide you certain inputs, please contact uh, the information here. You can reach out to Shravani also personally, and I believe we can have a continued conversation. So once again, on behalf of Kiansa, I would like to thank you all for joining today, and I wish you all the best and have a good day. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarjit. Thanks everyone for attending.